Hi everybody, my name is Rick Berk. I've been a professional photographer for over 20 years, and for the past 15 I've been photographing landscapes and using that as part of a means to support my business. One of the things I'm drawn to in photographing landscapes is water. Water evokes a lot of different emotions in the viewer, dependent on how you capture that. My philosophy when I'm photographing water is I'll vary the shutter speeds so that I can get different looks and feels out of the water and create the image that I'm looking for to evoke different emotions from my viewer. There's several tools I'll use when I'm photographing water. First being a tripod. When I photograph water, I'm using a lot of slow shutter speeds, so a tripod is essential because you can't handhold such slow shutter speeds reliably. Second tool I'll use is a remote release for my camera so that I don't have to touch the camera once it's on the tripod to release the shutter. You don't want to get any camera shake. Probably the most important in terms of photographing water is going to be the View Sion Q 100mm filter system. That consists of both a polarizing filter as well as a set of neutral density filters that I can then use to help manipulate my shutter speeds. Polarizing filter is great for a lot of things, including making skies bluer, but also for handling reflections coming off of glass or water, cutting down on mist and haze in an image. So once you mount the polarizer to your lens, you can then rotate it so that you can get different amounts of polarization and adjust the effect to your liking as a photographer. In this scene here, you'll see that there's a lot of specular highlights in the foreground of this video. Now those highlights might be cool in some images. In this case though, however, you can see as I rotate the polarizing filter, those highlights are actually covering up some rocks underneath the water in the foreground area. And I might actually want to show those rocks as an area of interest in my scene. So as I turn the polarizing filter, you can see how the rocks are revealed. And that becomes a much more effective foreground in my mind than just the reflected water in the scene. So polarizers are great for reducing that reflection. You'll want to keep that handy just for that case. In this shot here, in this still shot, you'll see how I have, a quiet lake and I have a almost mirror-like reflection in the water, which can be great. It might be something that you want to do. But you'll also notice the greens in the trees are a little bit darker and muted than I might like, and the sky is a little more washed out as well. So in this next shot where I use a polarizing filter, you can see how drastically it changes the scene. I can now see into the water in the foreground a little bit, but you'll also notice that the trees are a much more vibrant green. The reason for this is that polarizers cut down on reflected light that's directly entering the lens. So if you use a polarizer, you'll cut down on that light. Light being reflected off of the leaves, being reflected off of the water is then eliminated so that I can see into the water, I can see the true green of the leaves, and then you also get the benefit of the darker blue sky as well in your image. So here I've minimized the reflection a little bit with the polarizer on the right hand side. On the left hand side you can see that without the polarizer I have a much stronger reflection. Now neither one is right or wrong, it's really up to what your own preference is as a photographer. If you wanted that strong reflection, then obviously you would probably not use a polarizer on the scene. But if there was something in the foreground, say there were fish or some rocks in the foreground that you wanted to reveal to your viewer, a polarizer would help you do that. Now, polarizers will not only help you control reflections, they will also help you make the sky bluer and increase the vibrancy of colors in your scene. You can rotate them to adjust the polarization effect to your preference, so you don't have to just go all or nothing. It can be somewhere in between if you like. View makes two different polarizers. One is the View Ariel circular polarizer, and the other one is the View Sion Q slim polarizer. The View Sion slim circular polarizer I prefer for wide-angle lenses so that I can reduce the vignetting that I might get with a thicker filter. Now, when I'm photographing water, the first thing I look for when I get on a scene and find the water that I'm looking for is reflections. If the water is producing a reflection similar to what you saw on the lake or on the waterfall, I'll look to see if it enhances the image. In a case like this with this lighthouse, it definitely adds a visual element to the image that creates some interest. So I wasn't looking to necessarily eliminate it. I did use a polarizer on here to help with the blue in the sky, but not so much that it eliminated the reflection in the lighthouse. So you'll see that keeping that reflection of the lighthouse really adds some visual interest to this scene. In this scene here, you can see where I didn't use a polarizer at all. I wanted that reflection. I did use a 3-stop ND filter and a 3-stop hard edge ND grad, which we'll talk about in a future webinar. But by using the slower shutter speed, I was able to let the water wet that sand and create that reflection that really creates some element of interest in the scene. The clouds reflecting on the sand and the rock reflecting on the sand really create some interest. So those reflections become important to a photographer when you're looking at a scene like this. In this next shot, while I had some strong reflections that I wanted to keep in the scene, I also had some foreground interest underneath the water's surface, so I had to be careful with the slim polarizer not to go too far with the polarization effect. So what I did was I twisted the polarizer, rotated it just enough so that I could reveal some of those pebbles and little rocks in the water in the foreground area, but not completely eliminate the reflection that I had in the middle ground of those clouds on the lake itself. Like I said, you can use the polarizer effect and nuance it so that you're not using just all or nothing. You can have it in between so that you're getting exactly the effect you want without anything that you don't want. Polarizers do more than reduce reflections in water or deepen the color in the sky. They can also reduce specular highlights on wet rocks and also minimize haze and mist that you might get off of a waterfall. And again, you'll rotate the polarizer till you get the preferred level of polarization that you're looking for in the scene. In this shot here, you can see how the rocks are very wet and they're creating these nice bright highlights in the scene. That may be something that you want, but it may be something that you don't want. I actually, in this scene, unpolarized, I think it's a little too bright. As you watch this video, you'll see how the polarization effect takes place and completely eliminates the highlights coming off of those wet rocks. This may be important, especially if there's something, some graffiti or something that you wanted to show on the rocks itself so that you could reveal what was beneath the reflection as you turn the polarizer. Now in this still shot, with no polarization, again, you can see the highlights coming off of the rocks, and you can see how it might detract from the waterfall itself. The highlights are fairly bright coming off the rock, so it might be something that you don't want to show so much of. This is with no polarization, so you can see the highlights fairly brightly. In this next shot, with the polarizer on, turned to full polarization, I've completely eliminated the specular highlights from the rocks themselves. So the focus becomes squarely the waterfall and the rocks become secondary to the waterfall itself. Now in this comparison, you can see with the polarizer and without, no polarizer in the center and with the polarizer on the sides, you can see the difference that using a polarizer can make. Again, this was an all or nothing comparison. You might go somewhere in between where you minimize the reflections coming off the rocks but not completely eliminate them as well. In this shot here, I'll show you how using a polarizer can help add perceived sharpness to an image by cutting through the mist and haze. This shot here with no polarizer, you can see we have a strong reflection in the foreground water, and we also have a strong reflection coming off of the wet rocks right by the waterfall itself. In this next shot, with the polarizer being used, you can see how drastically it changes the image. This wouldn't be a shot that I would necessarily prefer because I did like that reflection, the color that was coming up in the water and the brightness on the rocks a little bit. But I might go a little bit halfway between this and no polarizer to kind of balance things out a little bit. But as we zoom in here to this detail shot, you can see how the use of the polarizer actually somewhat enhances the perceived sharpness in the image by reducing that mist and reflection coming off of the rock itself. The shot on the right with the polarizer does have a higher level of perceived sharpness because that mist and that haze is eliminated, as well as the reflection off of the rock that's creating a little bit of glare in the lens. Again, you may not want to go 100% polarization, but somewhere in between, and you will increase the perceived sharpness in the image.